Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. This is the City of Aspen City Council work session for August 14, 2023. Tonight on our agenda, we have two items. One is a Lumberyard affordable housing project delivery and finances discussion. And then we're going to check in with our council work plan goal of community building and health. But we're going to start with Lumberyard. Chris and Pete, if you'll introduce the item and yourselves.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Chris Everson, City of Aspen Project Manager for the Lumberyard Project, and I'm here with...
Pete Strecker, Finance Director.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So our public hearing on the Lumberyard project has been continued until September 12th. In the meantime, Council asked for numerous work session topics to be covered. The first of those being project delivery and funding, which will be today, and we'll be coming back on August 28th to discuss topics related to other areas that Council asked for additional information. And we'll have a comprehensive list of those items on August 28th for you. The memo for today's discussion contained an extensive description of the anticipated project delivery methodology for the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project. This presentation focuses mostly on different funding scenarios that staff has assembled for you to review, and we can jump right into those. Do you want to go ahead, Pete?
Sure, thanks. So the big caveat with all of this on the next few slides is that nothing is absolute. We're not proposing any one option. We're really just trying to paint kind of the backdrop to everything here to give you a sense of feasibility and just to let you know, like, the door is open and there's options available to you. You can see here this graphic on the bottom, which is really the real estate transfer tax revenues over time. And you can see we mapped a trend line to that, so you can see there is a positive growth rate on that trend line, which is really nice to see. But you can also see the variability behind the actual collections in that trend line. And so that's really just to kind of reinforce the aspect to the whole discussion tonight that variability is present. It's always going to be present. There's no way around that. But even with that, there's a path forward. Tonight we have a number of different scenarios that we've kind of built up. And again, they're just really to kind of paint, like, not necessarily lower and upper bounds, but to kind of give you a sense of what different realities might do to the development of this size and the costs associated with that, and what timeline they can be done on. Next slide. So in all of the models, we have a few assumptions built in. Some of them are consistent throughout the different scenarios, and some of them are part of the variability built into each one. But all of them consistently have us as the developer for phase 0 at this time, so the infrastructure phase. And then all of them have us kind of stepping back and just being the lender thereafter and finding another developer to put forth the rest of the development. They also all assume right now that we get an operator there to basically run the property thereafter. We have done this with public-private partnerships in the past, most notably the three smaller developments we've done around town. It really worked out well for us. And so that's kind of the model we're basically proposing this time, but obviously there's still variables there to consider. Also, none of these modeled assumptions include outside money basically coming in. So we do not have partnership dollars, we don't have grant dollars, things of that nature. So this is a very conservative approach when you look at it from that lens. Also, it is very important to note that everything is based on the design as it sits today, and obviously there's still moving parts to that. You guys are still considering other alternatives, and it's not to a detailed level yet that really firms that up. There's no guaranteed price on this, so those costs can always change. Next. There are some variables that are definitely in play for you to consider as you talk amongst yourselves at the end of this conversation. One of the things that we've really talked about and heard from a council member specifically is about making sure that this isn't the only thing that's being done in the next number of years, that there's some flexibility for this council or future councils to consider other projects. Right now, we have $20 million in 23 to do something outside of just the Lumberyard or finishing up Burlingame Phase 3 at this point. And so for all these assumptions right now, or for all these scenarios right now, we do have 15% of annual collections always being set aside. That is a variable you can adjust up or down, and that will, again, play into how does each scenario play out in terms of the duration and the costs. We also put in a lot of the models the option to do some sort of debt financing if you would choose. Right now, we just modeled in a $70 million borrowing option, which, talking with our underwriters, gives us roughly a $4 million debt service payment in today's market with our AAA credit rating, just to give you a perspective. So the next few slides kind of all look the same. There is just some changes in the assumptions in terms of how quick do revenues come in the door and how fast does construction escalation go. So right now, this is the baseline model, which basically says we'll have 5% growth on the real estate transfer tax year over year. Obviously, any one given year that might go up or down, but that kind of mirrors what the long run average would be right now. And then sales tax, typically we've kind of had a long-term experience, a little bit over 4%, but right now we've kind of always stuck with a 4% average annual growth rate on sales tax. Obviously, the SDR tax is a brand new tax. We had our first month worth of collections last month. 2 months ago, but we saw it last month. That's a nice picture there. Oops. So, that's a little bit of an unknown. But we're assuming a similar growth rate at this point in time for that real estate transfer tax, SDR tax.
Can we stay on that slide for a second?
Yep.
Thanks. And if you want to keep talking about it, feel free. I just want everybody to get a chance to.
Sure. Yeah, the last thing here that we have on here right now is the average annual growth rate on construction, which is at the 5% increase per year. Obviously, we've had some rapid escalation in the last couple of years, but long-term trend, hoping that the 5% is at least a reasonable benchmark. And then as you can see, we have two different columns of whether we do or don't issue debt associated with this and how that changes the timeline on each phase and when it would complete, as well as what the projected cost would be for those phases. It is important to note that the debt service cost isn't in there, so the borrowing cost isn't in the far right-hand column, essentially, which is about 40 to 50 million over the life of the payback of that debt. So in terms of borrowing, once you add that in there, that's roughly maybe a $500 million total project that completes in 15 years with debt, or it is a roughly $15 million project that ends in 18 years. Also in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that we're setting aside somewhere between $70 and $90 million while we're setting aside 15% of annual collections.
So a couple of other things to note here. The amount of interest that the city would have to pay on the debt if we did go with the debt scenario on the right-hand side can vary depending on whether we leave the debt out there for 30 years or if we go ahead and pay off the debt after a shorter period of time. So the debt could be some 40 million, could be some 50 million, depending upon how long we leave the debt out there. Additionally, the reason why we didn't include the debt service and the interest in these comparisons is we wanted you to see the effect of the timeline primarily on the overall cost of the facilities, knowing that there's going to be some 40 to 50 million in debt service beyond that, okay? So something else to pay attention to throughout these is not only the overall duration of the project, here 18 years in the baseline with no debt, or 15 years in the baseline with debt. Obviously, there's going to be comparisons made to the schematic design estimate, which we put together that was roughly $395 million. That was based on, phasing this project as quickly as we could in 10 years without taking into account a need for additional funds for other projects. So leaving funds aside for other projects, here again, Pete mentioned the 70 to 90 million in the upper right-hand corner, quite a bit of funds to do other things with, while at the same time doing the largest project we've ever taken on in terms of affordable housing projects here in the city of Aspen. So moving on to the next one.
Yep.
So this is a more optimistic model.
Yeah, so I mean, again, same format, so the big difference being that revenues come in 1% greater per year, and construction costs actually don't grow quite as fast as in the baseline model. They're at 4% growth instead of 5% growth. And you can see that cuts down the duration to about 14 years under both scenarios, essentially, at this point. I think, Chris, if I remember correctly, we modeled based on when could you truly cash fund each phase, or not cash fund, but complete each phase. Obviously, we could probably advance things slightly by a year or so, just depending on how the numbers played out. But it gives you a little bit of a sensitivity to if revenues were better or if construction costs were not quite as great. And then we have the same thing with the last scenario, which basically changes the durations again.
Just one more thing on this optimistic model. You can see the overall project duration remains the same, but the delivery of phase 2 is a couple of years sooner. Yeah. So essentially, you'll be borrowing that $70 million, if you choose to do so, to get the use of 91 units 2 years sooner than you otherwise would have been able to, which is something to consider. So here's the pessimistic model.
Yep. And so you can see the 19 years and 26 years, which is definitely a much longer time frame. And again, that can also be adjusted by how much money do we set aside for other projects as well. I mean, you have a lot of money being set aside under the no debt option, about 140 million, because it takes such a longer duration to actually complete that project. So every year we're still setting aside that 15%. Questions on that? Good. So this is really just the summary of those past 3 slides, and kind of gives you that immediate comparison. And again, these options, none of them include the actual cost of borrowing, so another 40 to 50 million in those ones that include with debt in the title. But you can see again is how much is also being set aside for other projects. Those are all decision points for the council to consider. And again, these are all based on schematic design at this point in time, so those things can all change. Anything else to add?
You don't have to choose any one of these at this time. This is just, 6 different ways that the project could be funded. They're all simply possibilities. All of the variables and assumptions could be changed, and we could come up with 6 different ways of doing this, probably 10 different times. We had some questions for council. If you feel like using these questions as a guide to any discussion that you may wish to take on, in addition to any further questions you might have?
I have a lot of clarifying questions that I would suggest might be appropriate before we get into those.
Yep, absolutely. You can start with them now?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Pete. First, I'm going to say, it's not really intended as a comment. I just want you to understand where most of my questions are coming from. I remain very unclear on the sources of funding. So I feel like I've been presented with sources and uses, and the sources column is missing all the information. So this looks more like uses to me than sources. So this is where my questions mostly come from. You talked about funding the annual debt service. You referred to it as the first mortgage in your package. And then you talked about a debt issuance, a bond issuance. I'm not sure if those are intended to be one and the same or not.
No. those
Okay,
are-
so could you explain to me what this borrowing structure is? I'm so in the dark on this, I feel.
Sure. Would you like me to go ahead?
Sure.
Sure. In terms of the sources, may I go ahead with that first? In terms of the sources the city council has at its disposal what we internally call the City of Aspen 150 Housing Fund. The housing fund it receives revenues on an annual basis from the real estate transfer tax, the sales tax portion, which is dedicated to affordable housing, as well as the new short-term rental tax. So in the initial slide that Pete showed was the growth line of the primarily the real estate transfer tax in that case, but all those fund revenues essentially going up on that trend, dedicated to affordable housing. Some of those uses include things like operation of APSHA. Some of them include things like we're currently funding the development of the Burlingame Ranch Phase 3 project. So there's all kinds of different uses within the 150 Housing Fund, which is all dedicated to affordable housing. So the sources of funds in this scenario is your dedicated housing fund. The different debt mechanisms mentioned, one, the potential use of a general obligation bond debt would be drawn against the 150 fund. So think of that as debt that would be against the big picture 150 housing fund at the city level. The mortgages for each building would be separate from that. The mortgages for each building would be something that at occupancy, there would be a closing, usually a few months after full occupancy, wherein a private bank typically would provide a mortgage on that building, and the net operating incomes of that building would pay that mortgage debt. So you've got the mortgage being paid from the net operating incomes of the building, but at a higher level, you'd have that general obligation debt being paid at the 150 fund level. So there's a hierarchy to those levels of debt, if that helps at all.
Okay, so to make sure I understand, the taxpayers of the city would be on the hook for the 4 million. I think it was 4 million was the number of annual debt service you used on the general obligation bond.
Yep.
In not perpetuity, but some extended period of time, 30 years plus, I'd imagine.
We assumed 30 years. Correct?
30 minus.
So $4 million ongoing obligation for the taxpayers of the city, and then the city would have a debt service payment on each building as a first mortgage specific to that piece of real estate.
Would actually be, so each one of these buildings, if they're phased individually, would more than likely be set up as an operating entity. So the mortgage would be in the name of the operating entity, and the debt would be under the developer. So the developer would have a piece of each building entity. The mortgage would be in the name of the entity, and the developer would use the net operating incomes to pay that debt. What we also didn't factor in is, any fees from the developer to serve as the operator. We've actually placed all the fees in these models in the initial development. But there could be some trading off related to, all right, maybe less fee in the initial development, and then more. So there's, again, 10 different ways you could model that. So just to be clear, though, the net operating income would pay that mortgage, yes.
Okay, so how
That
much,
wouldn't
how
be
much is that
with the
mortgage
city of
amount?
Aspen.
What's the annual debt service payment?
The annual debt service payments have been modeled in for each phase based on roughly the amount of mortgage that each phase can support. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay, so this is part of where I'm struggling. On page 19 of the model, the operating pro formas, there is no share of the NOI contemplated to the development partner, which is something you just mentioned. There's no debt service cost put in there. So I see $2 million of total NOI pre-share and no debt service costs.
It's already come out.
Already come out where?
It's already come out of the net operating income. It's already taken out in that calculation.
Okay, so we're confident there's, between the two buildings, approximately 2 million a year in this stabilized year of post-debt service NOI?
Hang on, so you're down here, right?
Yes.
Okay. So no, the debt service would come out of that total
come out
profit
of
or
it.
loss, yeah.
So I would really like to know how much the modeled annual debt service is for each of these phases. And can these buildings support that debt service?
Sure.
And how much debt service, how much debt are we talking about?
So here's the amount of funds available to pay the debt. And the debt on each is modeled to be, roughly 70% of that. I'm not going to bring up the Excel spreadsheet in the
Yeah.
public meeting.
Okay. And just one more thing I wanted to know. I'd like to learn more about that with you, Chris, but
This is exactly the same scenario that we've done at 488 Castle Creek, 517 Park Circle, 802 West Main Street. Same methodology.
on those projects, the developer does not hold a mortgage in their name.
The operating entity for each building does, and the developer uses the net operating incomes to pay the mortgage.
Is the city a guarantor of that debt?
Yes.
So,
The city has the right to pay off the debt and buy out the facilities at any time for any reason.
but at any point, if the NOI were, or if the cash flows were insufficient to pay the debt service payment, the city would be on the hook for that out of its other funds.
That would be our expectation based upon community expectations to preserve the housing, that we would pledge our ability to back that and then use our legal remedies to express to address the default of our partner.
There'd be more than one potential remedy.
Okay. Why did you choose to project the 150 fund revenues as growing uniformly up and to the right in any of these scenarios?
So there's no cyclical pattern to the real estate transfer tax. All I can tell you is that growth line does have positive direction. And, I think we're in a period where we came off a high, so we actually might have some years in the near term where they're a bit more subdued in terms of transactions year over year. But that also doesn't preclude the aspect that there'll be growth over a duration, certainly over a 30-year duration. So I couldn't tell you how severe or when the next upswing or downswing would be. So we had to basically assume some uniformity to it. I will also say that at $4 million a year, even if you're pulling in only $12 million a year in just the real estate transfer tax alone, you're very stable in terms of repaying your debt service payment. And then you get a layer on top of that, the sales tax revenue and the short-term rental revenue as well. So there's a definite reason not to pledge the full amount of the real estate transfer tax because it has too much variability to it.
Yeah. I think the historic standard deviation is like 0.4, so in other words, 40% variability from the high to the low.
Yeah, and again, I think we're still modeling well above a $4 million number.
If we have 10 years of negative growth in the revenue collections, what happens?
It depends on how the debt has been structured. And so there's a few different options the council will have. So for example, if the 150 fund is not performing as anticipated or underperforming, you have the option with other funds to transfer them into the 150 fund to cover that obligation. You have the option to consider refinancing depending upon what the relationship looks like and who you've brought in as a partner, particularly nonprofit versus profit. So there's a lot of options if you find yourself in that. This is a pretty conservative approach though here. We've been, the notion of issuing debt out of this fund has been a very conservative, slow process to even model. And that was because they're that very issue that you're concerned about Counselor Guth, is that what if this were to tank to 4 million for 4 years? What happens? But we're pretty confident that the revenues on real estate transfer tax are going to be in excess of that debt service payment of 4 million. When you look at the 3 revenue sources, I have a lot of confidence on our historical trends that will not be an issue.
Thanks. I think I've gained some clarity on this in your presentation, but I wanted to make sure that I'm on the right page. In all of the different scenarios you analyzed, you presented cases that involve debt and cases that don't involve debt. I think now that in the scenarios that don't involve debt, you're paying as you go, meaning you believe that the RET fund balance at that time will be sufficient to cover those expenditures. Is that correct?
Correct. So that is really what's playing into the timeline on a lot of these scenarios, as we lengthen out the project in terms of when it will complete, because we assume we'll pay as we go.
Okay, so put simply, on this particular slide, in 2029, we believe we will have $132 million to be able to contribute to this project.
Correct.
Other than the general obligation bonds and the project-specific mortgages that you discussed, are there other funding mechanisms that exist and are being contemplated?
Not at this time, not in these models, but there could be.
There are other financing mechanisms. There's plenty of different ones that local governments have. For example, this building was used with a different type of financing mechanism than GO. There's options related around that. There's industrial revenue bonds. There's all kinds of different approaches we may take. And one of the important things I just want to help the council realize too is this is if Aspen pays the whole way right now in most of this, right? This doesn't show any grant funding offsets or anything like that. That, you know, as an example, there's about 300 million sitting at the state right now looking for a place to go. Under Proposition 123 that we're looking at real closely. So we're looking at ways to offset the
Half of
communities.
low-income
No,
tax
it is
credits or
not.
something else?
No.
It is not. No, we actually would want our development partner to come forward if they think LIHTC makes sense in this project. We've examined it, we've thought about it, but we really think that's a conversation with a development partner who wants to go through the process of trying to acquire those credits. And so I am not worried about whether the community can pay for it. It's just the community needs to make some choices. And that's where the hard part comes in. So we've shown you an example that puts aside funds for other housing projects for you, 70 to 90 million in the version that's set up in front of you right now. You know, the original direction we had was build this as fast as you can. So we had that 70 to 90 million rolled in to deliver the project even sooner. And so really this is how fast does this community want this done, and what are they willing to give up to make that happen?
Under some of the state programs that are becoming available under Prop 123, those would be separate from typical low-income housing tax credit funding programs where you can get funding for rental units that serve up to 60% of area median income. Under some of the Prop 123 funding that's coming available, we may be eligible for funding, if we're able to get entitlements for the project, for some units up to 140% of area median income. So the state is starting to bring forward funding sources that are helping to fill this middle income gap from 60% of area median income up to 120, 140% of area median income, which is an area that we heavily serve. That's our Category 2 and Category 3 incomes. The LIHTC usually serves 60 and below, and we sort of struggle with 60 up to 200% of area median incomes because we have to serve this broad range of area median incomes because of the fact that we have this massive income gap, right? So some of the state funding that's becoming available now is starting to be able to fill that gap better than years past.
I'm going to ask a question on that and then come back to my list. Do the requested entitlements provide for the flexibility to alter the APSHA categories as necessary to take advantage of that financing?
You can make that amendment on the floor when you're in a regular meeting after you've closed the public hearing. But you need to get through the public hearing before amending the ordinance with those types of things.
Yeah,
But as it exists today, that
two answers,
flexibility is
though.
not in there.
I mean, one, it's already
Or is it?
baked in to the income distribution that's in the application today, and also there's additional flexibility that we could add to that. So we would, as part of any solicitation for a private developer partner, ask them to bring forward any of these funding opportunities that they can bring to the table to make these scenarios better.
Okay.
And where we just have to be careful about that is the NOI, right? We need to make sure that the NOI is high enough that the categories haven't shifted so low that it's just not going to perform, and then we're taking on that obligation in the 150 fund.
Yep, understood that.
We're probably going to have pressure put on us to make one of these phases low-income housing tax credit, is my guess. We probably should review the needs where we have the income distribution modeled, and make a tough decision as to whether or not we would want to apply for low-income housing tax credits, or whether we would want to apply for some of these more middle-income choices. All those decisions are yet to be made.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's a cap on LIHTC and CHFA total funding, which might be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million, which in a project of this dollar magnitude is not that relevant to alter our, what our community needs, so.
Phase two here would be a good candidate for it if we decide to go that route.
Do we have a modeled scenario that contemplates building the entire project at once in a single phase?
We would need some good partnership, I think, if we were going to try to make that happen. We do not have the local resources. We wouldn't have enough capacity to fund a debt service payment. I think a single phasing would require a partner, hands down.
But we could bond for it, potentially, general obligation bond.
So, yes, you would be pledging the assets, the same assets though you use for critical infrastructure. So, you're at about $1 million every 3 years on roads, your buildings, things of that nature. So it'd be your asset management plan where you fund your infrastructure, one of your top 6 goals that you would be diverting towards this.
Yeah, the primary reason I ask that is because I'm trying to understand what this project actually costs today.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of extra cost baked into these gross cost dollars because of inflation and escalations.
So everything's based on a baseline. There is a baseline estimate for the project that's based on 2023 dollars. I don't have it in front of me. We've got that. Everything sort of springboards off of that in all of these escalations.
Yeah, I think that'd be valuable for me to understand. There's a lot of questions going, how can the city possibly spend $450 million on this project? And that it's not, there's not a direct answer to that because it's not a $450 million project today.
We want to be cautious about putting a low number out there.
Yeah. No, I understand, but I think we have to understand, what does this project cost today? If you were to, if this was a private project that you were building today, what does it cost?
It's some $325 million, but again, we want to be cautious about putting a low number out there because of the fact that there's really not a realistic scenario where we're going to deliver it that way, unless we can find one.
I'm curious in learning more about that, like what would be the, drawing a blank on the efficiencies of building it all at once, in terms of construction escalations and cost savings from doing the project all at once, and what would the debt cost the community in that scenario?
Well, and if I can just dovetail a little bit, I mean, that's an excellent opportunity to make a mention that we are looking for community partners. In a community like Aspen, we have certain community members that have the ability to maybe help out a project like this. And it's something that we talk about at different housing meetings that I have around the state with different mayors and in other meetings, is that we are looking for exactly what you're talking about. People that are thinking like you are, saying, if we can get this done now, we get it done more efficiently, more effectively, and it can hit our need when our need is happening, which is now. So Austin, I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you'll put in your article that, yes, we are looking for community partners to get us over the finish line with this. We would love to deliver this product as early as possible, and we welcome any inquiries from anybody in our community. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, that dovetails nicely into what I think is my last question here, and I want to sort of set the stage a little bit. So we're contemplating a public-private partnership. We're contemplating and modeling a scenario where the partner may or may not share in some of the net operating income. The partner is expected to maintain the building to a satisfactory level. Partner gets to manage the building, has to develop the building. The partner is very limited in the rents that they can charge because of the APSHA stipulated rents. Can you help me understand what, and I think this might help Austin, it might help the community understand how we're going to find a partner here. What about this opportunity is going to be compelling and interesting to a private sector partner?
Sure. There's a well-known list published of the top affordable housing developers in the country. Unfortunately, affordable housing development has become a nationwide industry now. So in a manner sort of somewhat different from what we think of as sort of market rate developers who may also develop some affordable housing, there's a great deal of 100% affordable housing developers out there. On that list would be SCG Development, who is our development partner for, the 3 PPPs that we recently did for rental housing. So we would be aiming firmly at those list of top 100% affordable housing developers in the country. This would be of a scale that they would be interested in. They probably would be interested in looking for ways to try to do this project all at once. We would want to look at the feasibility of that, plus delivering it in phases as well, possibly. I think that the market that we're looking at is a group that is typically looking at 100% affordable housing developments.
And he didn't quite answer your question, though, about why would someone want to bid to be our partner? And I think there's a couple of things I can add, and Chris, will you just gather your thoughts on that? Why would you want to bid on this project? First of all, is whatever scenario we're in, there is what I'll call, for layman's terms, a management fee we pay for developing the project, right? That is purely an income line for the project, for the developer. Very common if you're not used to working in this arena. So one, it is still profitable to do it. And we need to make sure we keep the project profitable for a partner to come forward. Does it mean to be gobs of money? No, but does it need to be reasonable for the environment we're asking them to construct in and to the entitlements we're requiring them to construct to? I think another key thing with this is if this whole thing were to be developed at once, if someone comes forward, we reach a new scale of development partners that we don't reach in our 50 range development projects. This is just a different caliber of developer who comes in to develop this, this is more their niche size. We have a lot of people, including people who live in our community, who think nothing of going in and building 16,000 units in a master development, right? We need to be just enough to make them be willing to consider this project in their portfolio too. So there is funding for them. There's also being part of one of the largest and most historic deed restricted housing programs in Colorado that's seen as a model. And quite frankly, I think that there is still a profit to be made. The community should not assume that this is done at no investment into that development partner.
Thanks. So I appreciate the intangible there. I need more granularity specifically on the profit model for the development partner.
Sure, the construction costs considered in these models.
Chris,
Sorry.
one second, sorry. So the first point that Sarah made about the development fee, I don't really see that. If that's their only real income source, that's fee-for-service development. I would not call that a public-private partnership. That's us going to hire, you name it, developer to oversee the development for us. That's probably better than what we've been doing historically, but that's not a real public-private partnership, in my view. So where's the juice for this developer? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Where's the return? Where's it coming from? $2 million of NOI pre-debt service, there ain't much there. Pardon my, casual language there, but there's just not much there. So I just don't get where the return is coming from for a private development partner. And that's where I need some granularity in
In
the
all of these scenarios, there's 10% of construction costs baked in as a developer fee for the initial development. That can be traded off in any agreements that we put in place. We can put in place a waterfall agreement for the net operating incomes where the developer gets any remaining leftover income after payment of debt services, after the set aside for reserves. The developer and the city can split any remaining net operating income however they choose based on the agreements that we put in place, which can change that 10% of construction cost initial development fee. So there's some levers that you can pull to change the mechanism of the fee, but it's basically fee-based. That's the way the industry works these days.
Yes and no. I mean, there's housing tax credits that can be sold. There's an ongoing management fee income stream.
I mean, part of it is that we don't want to assume what the development partner wants, right? Particularly if, who their investment partners are that they're bringing to the table. There might be some specific benchmarks they need to hit. And quite frankly, when we can firm up entitlements, hopefully, and then firm up our design a little bit further along, that will provide clarity of what we're hoping to achieve. That in turn will let people know if this is the right project for them to spend time responding on. I think what we have found, I mean, again, I just talked to Eagle County last week about their attempts to go in without entitlements, and it's not working. They've tried twice now, that they had to give up their category mix in order to have a more open process. And then the community just come back and said, no, we need to serve this AMI. Like, this is we have to do. And in turn, we'll give up these other things to make sure it happens, which is just part of the trade-offs. I think that for right now, when I shop this project around informally, what I hear is definitely an interest in doing it more quickly than the pay-as-you-go or the city full financing a route, which is exciting to me. I think that means someone's thinking about coming, more than one person, they're thinking about coming to the table with resources to make that happen. Unfortunately, we just can't really enter those discussions right now. And that's why we run these scenarios, but we don't get into a ton of detail here. We've got nth degree of detail behind the scenes to support us. However, until we enter those conversations and see who thinks this is a good project for their portfolio, we're a bit in the dark. We could be just modeling after what we don't know what we're chasing. And for example, is the LIHTC. I don't feel good about the LIHTC. Maybe for some one bedrooms, but beyond that, I get really concerned about our wages here. Compared to LIHTC. And I think you all need to have time to have that policy conversation because there's not been council direction whether to pursue or not pursue as a position going forward. So while we'd love to answer some of those questions, until we're in negotiations with the partner, I don't think we're going to be able to.
I appreciate that the parameters of the entitlements can help a developer understand what they have to do and where there's flexibility. And I've been trying to bring flexibility to the table in this set of entitlements. I have more comments for later, but I think on this particular question, I really just don't understand where the return is, where the cherries are for this development partner. So we're talking about a public-private partnership, but I don't know where the reward really is for that partner. And so to me, that really means that there's probably not a public-private partnership opportunity there, and we end up back in the developer seat as the city, and I'm not comfortable with that. So that's it for my questions for now, and I'll come back to
This is
statements
modeled
later.
the same way we've done it before, based on a fee model, so we've gotten it to work before. Different scale.
Thanks. Ward?
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate all the questions that you're raising. I'd like to respond to some of them. It's like a teeter-totter. If we adjust category mixes, We might chase some LIHTC funds and as I understand it, the Prop 123 are primarily funds for land banking at this point. But to chase after federal grants, we'd have to lower our categories, lower the AMI, and that decreases the NOI for the operator. If we raise the categories and we're increasing the income, the NOI, but are we meeting the community needs? And I have all along felt that the best way to do this is to do it as soon as possible. I think even perhaps the most pessimistic 6% construction inflation might be low. So I think there is a huge incentive to build, as you're suggesting, build perhaps all three, well, 4 phases, because phase 0 is really a phase, but to build them all at once makes most sense. Economically, it's going to cost the least amount of money in the long run. But I think to put some thought behind your question of what is going to incentivize a partner on this, I think one thing is that the infrastructure has to be in place. I think Breckenridge is just, they're being frustrated by being able to fund infrastructure fees for sewer and water in a development. So the risk involved with not having entitlements makes it less attractive to a private partner. I think as far as I'm concerned, all of the scenarios are showing a design and build, and I think we've spent several years coming up with the design that we want. And so I think the cost of a design for a private developer can be decreased because I feel real comfortable with what we've come up with as far as energy usage, density, orientations of buildings, traffic flow, traffic studies, parking, all of those things in design that we've been working on for years, I think would come off of the cost of a private developer coming in and having to do a design as well as develop. So I think the least or the hardest of the Aspen Housing Partners is 48 Castle Creek Road, which had LIHTC, I believe, landed at that site, and it's been the most difficult. It produces the least return income on investment. So in changing the number of bedrooms and the number of categories to meet a developer's needs may be contrary to what our needs are as a community. And I think that at this table, at least I feel my charge is to develop what the community needs, not necessarily what we need to make it profitable to another developer or to a partner. So my number one concern is to create a project that answers the needs of our community as soon as possible. And chasing after a lot of these variables have give and take one way or the other. Timeline is really important, but if we can't do it in one phase all at once, I think the reality of it is that we're going to have to phase it unless we have some big bucks come in as part of this. But yeah, I think that I don't know how to summarize what I'm trying to address your concerns, Bill, but I think that changing the category mix and chasing after LIHTC funds, our Prop 123 funds, might be counterproductive what the community needs and what a private developer would need for net operating income. So I think at this table we have to decide those things. We have to decide some of the things that will help bake in what are known, because developers, your developer, have told me that the thing that they hate the most is unknowns. That you want to have as many knowns in the project as possible. And by us deciding, figuring out some of those knowns, design, entitlements, decreases what the developer has to do. But I don't know if I rambled on too much there, but somewhere in my mind that made sense.
Thanks, Ward. Sam, any questions, comments that you want to share now?
Yes, thank you. Just some really quick, hopefully. Phase 3, I saw in the packet is ownership, but we can potentially change it to rental because we put may instead of must, correct? Just wanted to,
You'll be able to debate that in your regular meeting on September 12th.
okay, but it's a possibility at this time. Just wanted to ask that. I was wondering when we will decide on debt or no debt, since that's not part of the entitlement process, so where in the timeline will we discuss
Yeah,
this
that-
in a more
It's
formal
not
way?
a decision that needs to happen today or in the next week, year. I mean, you still have some time. Right now, we modeled a debt issuance at the end of, for phase 2, for 2.
26.
Oh, it's 26? Yeah, so I think that's to help start pushing forward on phase 2. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, phase 1. So that's a few years out at a minimum.
3 years from now, potentially, we'll talk about what we're talking about now in a more
Yeah,
formal setting.
You have a duration up until probably even 3, 4, 5 months before that, if you really want to. We can issue debt in a handful of months, technically.
Thank you, that's good to know, because, I mean, these numbers are, great forecasting projections, but, come 3, 4, 5 years from now, we talk about all the variables that could change. Another question I had was, I know this model's after the RET tax, and I know the RET tax sunsets in 2040, and I was wondering if it was known when we might put that on a ballot to extend, because I think that's very important.
That is council's consideration of when you want to do that.
All right, well, just something to talk about, especially at some point, because as we talk about all these numbers, 30 years from now is past 2040 when the RET sunsets. So I definitely think we should get on that sooner rather than later, especially if we plan on moving forward with this, as I think we all do. I was wondering, so with that, I know the answer to this, but as things change, there's flexibility in delaying or speeding up this project. Basically, as the numbers change, as the scenarios change, like, yeah, we don't know where Aspen's going to be in 10 years, but.
Yeah, I mean, certainly money is one factor into accelerating a project. Obviously, you have to have a partner that can do that if that's the case, or the developer, or the aspects of just the schematics or the different variables that all come into that. I mean, it's not just the finances. But yes, finances would allow you to go quicker if you wanted to.
Okay, flexibility in that. 2 more I had was, the funding available for other projects, I calculate out to be, I think you guys did about $5 million a year set aside for other projects, which obviously can accumulate. But I think the thing on my and a lot of people in this community's minds is Centennial and the expiring deed restrictions of the rental, and then the situation of the ownership, and I just thought it'd be worthy to ask, is there enough money set aside, and those are very delicate situations, to make sure that we're not hampering ourselves from solving issues like that as we move forward?
So the money that's set aside includes $20 million in this year's budget, which doesn't go away. If you don't spend that this year, you'll have it next year. Plus the additional 15% are the numbers shown in the upper right. So you've got 20 million plus the numbers shown in the upper right. So it's not only the 5 million a year roughly, it's the 20 million now to do something with now, if you choose, plus that 5 million a year.
No, that's good to know, and I asked that question because I just think it's very good for people to know that there's a lot of, in my mind, a lot of money still set aside even with all these scenarios.
It seems to me that it's an awful lot of money to set aside for other things while you're taking on the largest project you've ever taken on. So that's why, I know, Bill, you had looked at the optional slide at the bottom. The second to last one was, what if you try to minimize the timeline? And then just sort of look at how much money you would end up with set aside for other projects. It's still quite a bit. So there are scenarios where we could accelerate it, you know, to a degree and still leave you with 36 or 30 million plus the 20 million in 2023. So it all depends on how much you want to try to take on while you're also doing the largest project the city's ever done.
No, and I appreciate that, and like we just discussed, this is a problem for another day in some ways, and it's a great conversation to have now to just like understand as we move towards it. My last question for right now is, I think I know the answer again, but this forecasting does not include a potential childcare facility on the property. It's just phase 1, 2, and 3 of the buildings and not that potential childcare facility.
Correct, and I presume a childcare facility would not be developed out of 150 housing funds.
It would be developed out of the Kids First Fund. You're currently increasing your fund balance there by putting additional sales tax dollars in there and the discretionary sales tax you split between housing and childcare in order to advance the Burlingame Center.
Okay, well, once again, thank you, good to know, thank you.
Sam, could I respond just, our comment on a couple of things? One, I think if we're gonna issue debt, we're gonna have to have an election. Number one, as you say, to extend the RET, but the other is to get most favorable interest rates on general obligation bonds, which would require voter approval too. So there are two questions. If we're gonna do something other pay as we go, to accelerate or to get this project delivered more quickly, that I think we're gonna have an election for those two separate issues.
No, I understand that. I'm talking about when, especially because you don't go into anything without knowing the financing of it. So if something sunsets in 2040 and we're issuing debt beyond that, that doesn't make sense. So
No,
it's a
we
conversation.
we
Yeah,
would-
we can.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm just,
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it up and just say we should do it at some point.
Those votes could be done in subsequent years.
Yeah.
And I also want to comment on the set-asides for the 150 fund. I think you correctly point out that there are increasing needs for putting 150 funds into not just producing new housing, but perhaps to maintain some of our existing assets. And I think we've shown the willingness to spend 505 funds to do the same thing for city-owned projects. So, yeah, I think it's important to understand that we need to have a reserve in that 150 fund for some of these upcoming expenses.
Yeah. Sorry, Tori, can I respond one sentence? Last sentence was.
If it's about this.
It is. I ask questions a lot of the time because not just for my personal knowledge, but just to have the
Understood.
question out there, just so you know and everyone knows.
Yeah, I understand.
Thanks. John, I'm going to look down at you. This is an opportunity for you to ask any clarifying questions or make any comments.
I just want to thank Pete and Chris for giving us another detailed memo that I think this solves any questions I had and hopefully should solve the public's questions. We have flexibility moving forward. We have the opportunity to possibly speed this project up, and we've done it before. So thanks.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is that we should continue to plan the long-range plan that I'm assembling in the recommended budget to include the 70 million debt issuance. So you can see the effects of that and consider that in the timeline. Because that is in the long-range plan, not in the 2024 plan, approving the 2024 budget does not obligate you to issue that debt. It is not the decision-making. It is just forecasting after the upcoming budget year that you're accepting. Just for clarity for those of you that this is your first budget cycle, we do that so that you can see what does the impact of the decision today have years down the line.
I would not support that statement.
I do. I would like you to continue with that. We need to see the modeling.
I agree. We need to see what long-term, what it looks like if we were going to do this. So if we don't have that modeling, how can we decide where we're going to go with this project? Thanks.
I agree.
So we come back to you, I think, the second week in October with the 150 fund, if I recall. And we'll provide you more detail on it then.
Bill, is there an alternative modeling that you're interested in seeing, or none at all?
Yeah, I'm not, the math's pretty simple to me on the general obligation bond. It, you know, the $70 million costs us $4 million a year. It's pretty simple math. I think our budget can support that. I don't need that incorporated into our budget to see whether it works or not. What I need to understand, and zero of my concerns have been addressed or allayed after today's meeting, is how much of a burden is this on our community and our taxpayers into the future? And what can a potential development partner bring to the table? I really don't know. I mean, what I have seen today is that this is a fee-for-service development model, which, again, I think it's better than what we've been doing, but it's just another expense tacked onto the project. You know, this is, I know you know this, but without question, my biggest concern about this project is the financial side of it. How is it paid for? I think it's a good project for the city. I think we need housing, but in a way, we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. Yes, we're reserving some money for other projects, but if this project is built out to completion, that represents approximately 8% of our APSHA deed restricted inventory. Once these units, the 277 units, are added to it, and we're putting a lot more than 8% of our financial resources into this project. So I think it limits our ability to be nimble and to use this money maybe in the best way for our community in the future. That's my biggest concern here. I'm not doing it because I'm not asking these questions because I don't want to build this project. I'm asking this question because of these questions, and I have these concerns because it's an awful lot of money. I don't know how this project can be built without debt. I think debt's a critical component to it. I think that requires a public vote, which is probably a good thing in my mind. But I just don't have a lot of confidence that the project financials can support a healthy partnership. I don't want the city to be the developer on this project.
I appreciate that.
So that's when the NOI comes in, right?
Right.
Right, and that's where you have the option during the second hearing of ordinance 10 to put some flexibility in there if you so choose as a council. To say maybe we can't do as many category 2 units for the NOI to pencil out where we want with a development partner in the future. So you, again, I think that you have options on the floor that allow you to address this. But what we can tell you is where the greatest demand is. And it might be that it requires some subsidy from the 150 fund. It might just be in order to deliver the project, right? That's the same issue you have at Truscott. When it needs major capital, you have to move funds over. So you don't have to answer these questions today. And you know, the negotiations with a development partner will not be a short negotiation. This is going to take several months. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for you to revisit this question as we go through that RFP process.
Yeah, I think what I keep coming back to is that we need to look at this through a different lens. I think the only way to really attract true private partners is with some kind of mixed income model. And that's why I suggested potentially some component of free market commercial. Maybe there's some component of free market residential that belongs in here. But the NOI, I just don't see it as being sufficient to generate an attractive return for a development partner here. And I don't want to continue down the same path where the city is acting as the developer.
All right, thank you. I mean, I guess I don't really want to get into, I want to focus on what our work session is about here. You know, you have reservations about the financing that you've seen here. I do not. You know, I've been through situations like this. I was on the city council when we approved Burlingame. There are trade-offs. And, you know, as you support your community and you support the things that the way that you spend the community's monies, there's trade-offs, and you're definitely going to have to reconcile that with yourself or vote how you see fit for the best of your community. And I know that you're doing that. I know you're asking really intentful questions, and I appreciate it so much. You know, but I don't want you to maybe get in your own way. You continue to say that you support this project, you support affordable housing, and the like. your reservations, I can't allay them except to say that there is work to be done. You have a seat at the table. You'll be doing this work. This project is not the road to ruin for Aspen by any means. We are a $1 billion a year community. This investment in our community is not that great. Your community also has spoken about their support for this, so it is our job to figure out how to get it done, and that's what we're gonna do if we decide to move forward with the ordinance 10 or some version of it. I want to say thank you to you guys. I said this when we had a meeting recently, our joint meeting around housing, that I just feel honored to be sitting here. And I thank you so much for your work. This is so difficult, and I truly have lost sleep over housing. I have had many interactions in my community that weigh on me and are very impactful for me. And at the same time, I'm just really proud of all of us that sit here and take on this, because it can be a headache. I can see you going through it. You're working your best to go over this and figure out how to make this the best project it can be. So I thank you for your time and your energy on it. I want to thank you guys for your presentation tonight. This was a request for a work session, a little out of a sequence perhaps, and a lot of times for us when we're doing projects like this. But I think it's for the best, and I think that this has been great information for our public. So thank you for the time and energy you put into it, you guys.
See you again in 2 weeks.
Yep. Thank you so much. Let's get on to our next topic as soon as these guys are ready to switch over. Checking in on a council goal. And for those of you that are interested in housing in Aspen, go play the Powerball tonight and, help out with this project, will you?
What is it, $1 billion?
No, it's not even close.
There was a Powerball of $1 billion.
It was, but it's not that anymore.
Somebody won that?
Somebody took that one.
Council, while they're getting set up, I just want to acknowledge how many staff are in this room just because how excited they are about this council goal. All of them in their departments are contributing in some way and felt it was important to be here in the room for the conversation. So you've got at least 7, 8? I can't quite see everybody, 7 or 8 departments here that are all part of this cohort.
Look at that list.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I'm Jen Uten, Senior Project Manager in the City Manager's Office, and I will be presenting with a number of other staff members this evening, as Sarah mentioned. I wanted to quickly acknowledge the team working on these goals to strengthen the quality of life and well-being of residents and to promote commercial vitality of locally focused businesses. With me at the table is Philip Sapino, Community Development Director. Following his presentation on the first set of objectives and milestones, we'll have Nancy Leslie, Sarah Roy, Jennifer Phelan, Austin Weiss, William Porter, Alyssa Farrell, Kim Ferber, and then back to Philip at the end. I'd like to also take a minute to just acknowledge, as Sarah did, that we have other folks who've contributed to this goal. So Megan Monahan, Nancy Nichols, Desiree Whitehead, and many others for their contributions to developing this goal plan.
And staff, to assist with transition times, can you please go ahead and all move forward if you're presenting so that we can do that quickly? Thanks.
I didn't see Jen until Pete moved.
And during this presentation, as we have done with other of these council goals, we're looking to see tonight whether these milestones capture your intent, specifically tonight for the building and health goal. And there's the language again that I read a little bit about. There's a number of ways that we will be talking about this goal in terms of policy development, future work sessions, actual development, and some of the work that we already do today in our facilities. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about that this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Philip.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Mayor and Council. Again, Philip Supino, Community Development Director. Count me as one of the several excited people to be here this evening. And there are really sort of three goal elements to this larger community building and health goal that relate directly to the work of the Community Development Department. I'm here to speak specifically to those three elements this evening. Those are, generally speaking, the nonprofit and public-private partnership goal element, the community, the commercial development dynamics goal element, and finally, commercial use mix, which falls towards the end of the list of goals. The timeline you see before you is really meant to illustrate one salient point, which is that while staff work has commenced and will continue on these two specific goals around the relationship between public-private partnerships or nonprofit organizations and economic development on the one hand, and also policies and regulations to address the timely completion of construction projects on the other, you really won't see council-facing work on those two specific elements of this goal until after the new year. So that's what we're just trying to show here, is that work has begun internally, but we won't really be bringing that work to you for some public meetings, some work sessions, until the end of this year, beginning of next year. And, you know, in my mind, I think in staff's mind, there's really two parts to this broader goal. There's the people-facing side of the goal, and there's the built environment-facing side of the goal. And of course, community development is focused on the built environment side of things. And so with respect to goal element A, a work session around public-private partnerships and nonprofit organizations. This is primarily policy work, and policy work is time-consuming. Requires a lot of face-to-face conversation with council, eventually, depending upon council direction, with the community. But broadly, staff has conceived of this particular element of the goal as really needing to begin with a bit of discussion of 40 years worth of planning history in Aspen. Going back to the 1983 Aspen Area Community Plan, discussions around issues like commercial vitality, use mix, locally serving businesses, resort and community dynamics. Really up to the present day, some of our community dialogue is focused on these issues. And council identified public-private partnerships and nonprofit organizations as potential tools for addressing some of those decades-long concerns around commercial dynamics in our community. And so staff's prepared to come with a work session beginning late this year, early next year, to have a discussion around how other communities use public-private partnerships and nonprofit organizations as tools to engage in economic development activity. Staff has conceived of using existing resources to initiate this conversation with council, and that work session really will be focused a little bit on some background and some examples from other communities, and finally, some robust discussion with council around the identification of the issues that are at play as you see them in the community, some discussion around your desired future condition as it relates to commercial vitality, and then how we can use these particular tools to address some of those concepts. And then moving on to the commercial development dynamics, which is sort of a euphemistic way for describing incomplete commercial construction projects in our commercial zone districts. This goes back to some discussions with the previous council in 2022 and early in 2023, where the previous council directed community development to start working on this topic. It was carried forward in a very similar way from the previous council to this new council. And the way it was conceived of previously was, are there incentives and or regulations that are available to ensure the timely completion of some of these projects? Again, staff anticipates coming to council in the beginning of, the end of this year, beginning of next year, to have a conversation again around what are the issue statements or problem statements as you identify them. How do they play out or manifest in our community? How do they relate to or impact commercial vitality and the health of our commercial core, the character of our commercial core? And then some discussion about work that staff intends to do with consultant support on best practices and examples from other communities about how they have addressed this particular issue. And with that, we'll hand it over to the next group of staff members who are here to talk about, again, some of the more human-facing aspects of this particular goal.
There's a lot in here.
Indeed.
There is a lot in here. And do you mind if I just interrupt
Not a
real
bit.
quickly? Because I wanted to kind of just discuss what you just presented. And I really kind of wanted to look to Bill. We've all been talking about locally serving business, community vitality, downtown, and all that stuff. The resource here is $25,000 to $75,000 for consultant work on this kind of plan to investigate it in this way. And I'm kind of looking at you for a couple reasons. You know, your professional history, your downtown ownership and commercial land. Does this make sense? Like, we have talked for years about trying to get at this as an issue, and we just don't. You know, when we start mixing the public and the private marketplace, and this is kind of what we're talking about here, right, is community structures. I'm just asking your thoughts.
Thanks. And thanks, Philip. Thanks, Jen. There's a few things at play here, and one of the things comes in later in the memo, specifically the land use code stuff that we talked about during the council goal about how do we incentivize the types of uses we want in private commercial spaces. And I don't even know if there's any consultants that exist that could help us with that. I think that's brainstorming with those of us that are in this room in the community. This feels a little nebulous to me, a little, you know, please don't take this as criticism. I just don't understand what could come out of this. Like, what are we hiring a consultant for? I know there was some discussion of like, how do we create a community co-op type of thing to do a space like, how do we get a nonprofit partner to do something like Explore Booksellers, for example? Yeah. Those are kind of lofty goals in my personal opinion. I don't like the language of like economic development. I don't think that we should be playing a role in economic development of Aspen. I do like the work of how do we incentivize the uses that we want through the land use code. I'm totally supportive of that. This one, in general, I don't really want to meddle in the private sector, and I don't know. I guess two cohesive thoughts at the end. I don't really want to play a role in economic development of Aspen as our government. I just don't know that we'll be effective, and I don't know that we need it. And secondly, I'm not sure how much we'll be able to accomplish in these nonprofit public-private partnership realms. I think we should focus more on the kind of clear tools that we have at hand, like the land use code.
Thank you. We'll come back. We'll come back at the end. I just wanted to stop where we were at this junction. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, just from a really high level, that Aspen has never been involved in trying to attract business. Has never been really involved in giving incentives or waiving fees or development fees like a lot of communities do for Walmart or some other big employer. But in a way, Bill, I think we are, if we're looking at crafting a way to have locally serving retail and food services, it is in a way economic development. And there's, I don't know how you can avoid, there's a balance between governmental interference and hands-off. If we want to incentivize something, then it's governmental action, whether it's a land use code or at some point we have to, if we see a need in the community, and one of the questions I had is a perceived loss of locally serving. Is it perceived or is it real? I think it's real, but the free market isn't supplying what we need. It's not supplying affordable retail, and it's not supplying affordable food services. So what we're left with and what we're being asked here for the next years is incentives or some way to get what the community is missing, the affordable food services, affordable retail. So it's like a contradiction. We don't want governmental interference, but we do want it because we want to get the outcomes that we want, not the outcomes we've been getting, without any kind of governmental intervention.
Yeah, it's a fair point, I understand it. I think I want to narrow the scope of it if we're gonna go under it. This may feel a little too wide to me. And the commercial vacancies and timely completion of development projects, those aren't my personal primary goals. I think those are really, really hard to control. I mean, other than development, timely completion of development projects, other than requiring a bond, which is so expensive, a construction completion bond, so incredibly expensive that it would affect the cost of goods and services to all of us in the end. I don't know that there's any other real tools out there. Philip may have some up his sleeve. I don't know, but I think that for me to get excited about this, it would have to be, how do we encourage the types of commercial uses we want in our core, and focus the efforts on that.
And so that I can help sort of parse some of these issues out a little bit. My staff completely agrees that we are struggling with how we can specifically deal with the incomplete construction projects and commercial vacancies dynamic, which is actually why there's a financial ask associated with this, because we're gonna have to spend significant time and resources, if council desires us to do that work, to go out and find other communities that have developed tools and understand how those tools work, and then understand how they could potentially be applied in the Aspen context. And just to make a clear distinction between goal elements, the ask on the public-private partnerships and nonprofit work is separate from that consultant work around specifically commercial construction, bonding, and incentives, right? So those are different issues, and staff plans on addressing this first topic with internal resources for the time being. But it's that second construction projects issue that we really need some outside help with
So Phil,
to
can I
respond to
ask,
council direction.
thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
If the others are supportive of this, could we focus the second one, not the nonprofit one, I personally would recommend that we put aside the work on commercial vacancies and put aside the work on timely completion of development projects. I just don't know that there's that much that we can do as a government on that, and focus the resources on commercial uses of private commercial space, or maybe even publicly owned space.
Right.
That's what I would see if there's interest in doing that. I feel like Philip might even, and his team might be struggling.
We're gonna come back, like I said, we're gonna come back, because this is the first time we're seeing this. Let's move on with the presentation, though, and I've got notes here about what we're kind of contemplating there. Because we're all struggling with that. We are all struggling with it. So, yeah, we'll be back.
Briefly, I'd like to take a moment to reflect and celebrate the contributions Aspen's facilities make in this space of connecting people and making human connections. And the red brick, the yellow brick, the Wheeler, the recreation facilities, and spaces like the pedestrian mall are places where people all come together in the community. And just, I won't read this slide to you, but just to give you a few highlights, for example, there are 120 families who come to the yellow brick. Recreation runs after school and daytime programs 255 days a year. There's face painting and balloon mall entertainment that are offered downtown in the summer. So we're making those connections every day in this community. The one bullet up here, 67% of the Wheeler attendees live in the 816 zip codes. So those are, it kind of goes from Dinosaur to Wolcott and to Aspen, but there are 41% of the paid attendees live in the 5 closest zip codes, and that doesn't include Basalt and Elgin and Carbondale. And so I'm gonna hand it off to Nancy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nancy Leslie, and I'm the Director of the Special Events. Thank you. The Director of the Special Events Department, and I am excited to be up here with my colleagues to talk to you about how we interact with the community building and health. The Special Events Department, as it stated on the previous slide, hosts many community events throughout the year. Some are new and some are traditional. We're fortunate enough to see firsthand how bringing people together feeding them, entertaining them, or providing some other platform seems to resonate within our community. So our goal is to continue to provide these kind of mind, body, and spirit experiences. While this slide focuses on the new, I'm going to kind of sprinkle it in with the things that we still do throughout the year, just so you get a really good sense of what we do. And again, I'm only going to talk about things that we do that are free and open to the public. So, kind of not the backcountry marathon or anything like that, just simply things that we put on that doesn't cost you anything to come and partake. So the July 4th, from very beginning to end, everything we do that day, everybody we host, it is free and open to the public. The community village, the parade, the concert, the laser light show. The Chill Out Wednesdays, which was new, focused here. It was held on Sister Cities, right next to Wagner Park, featured free ice cream and a musician, and she did campfire songs, just songs that everybody could sing along to. So there was great participation, free ice cream. It was very well received. We do the Kids Mall Entertainment. This was actually a council initiative started years ago, 12 weeks, all summer long. And then the Community Picnic. You guys are all aware it's happening this Thursday. We feed the first 750 people. And we're doing that in partnership with the Red Brick Arts. Then, very excited, we're bringing back the former Mac and Cheese Festival. So this is something people have asked us about for years. And so Sam from Meat and Cheese reached out. He wanted to do an Oktoberfest. We wanted to do mac and cheese, so we're bringing back Mactoberfest. So it's going to happen on September 9th. And then last year we had the winter kickoff, which was the Pete McBride event. Sold out at the Wheeler, even though it was free, but it was filled to capacity. And then lastly, our New Year's Eve. So we do, on Sister Cities, we do free make your own s'mores, hot chocolate, and kids entertainment. I'm now going to turn it over to my friend Sarah Roy.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm Sarah Roy, Executive Director of the Red Brick Center for the Arts. And I feel I can confidently speak on behalf of my colleagues here and also in the audience that creating human connection is at the heart of the work that we do every day. And that we believe these shared experiences that people are having together, whether they're in a softball league with the rec department, or they're at the Mac and Cheese Festival, or they're seeing a performance at the Wheeler, or they're taking an art class at the Red Brick, that these shared experiences that people are having together do create a stronger, thriving community. And the departments here not only take care of the facilities and the spaces that allow these opportunities to happen, but we also develop the programming and the events that enrich our lives. So we're super thrilled that council has made this a priority, and as Sarah and Nancy and everyone else said, we're super excited to work on this with you guys. So the arts. The arts is not just a performance, and it's not just an object. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to innovate, and to have those human connections. So at the Red Brick, we do this through a variety of ways. The first is we have nonprofit offices and artist studio space all under one roof. And we really work to nurture an environment of collaboration and support. And you see the kind of effect of this by the real friendships that are formed among the people that work in the nonprofits and the artists. And then you see from those friendships the collaborations that naturally start to happen among these organizations and the support that's happening. And then the greater effect is what you see out in the community when we get to experience all, again, the programming that all of the nonprofits are offering for our community. At the Red Brick, we also offer youth art classes and camps, and we work to create those in a really safe and welcoming environment for our kiddos. We have a scholarship program that assures that cost is not a barrier for anyone to participate. We have adult youth classes. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, we create classes for both levels. And we're starting to work on creating more adult classes at kind of varying price points. So again, to try to open it up to kind of a broader range of participation. We have a gallery exhibition program where we offer the opportunity for local and regional artists to have their artwork presented in kind of a professional setting and to make sales off of that. And again, we work to nurture a network among our exhibiting artists so that they can build up kind of a professional network of support among artists, among themselves, I should say. We host free community events in a very welcoming and inclusive spirit. And then lastly, we have a dance studio and conference room for rent at a very affordable place, at a very affordable price, which allows entrepreneurs such as Greg of Roaring Fork Fencers or Alessandra in her ballet class to come in and develop programming, again, that's for the benefit of our larger community. So this evening, I was going to spotlight a couple, yeah, you can flip it, Jen, thank you. For this evening, I was going to spotlight a couple of our youth and family programming that we think really speaks to your kind of council goal. So the school district has changed their schedule just a bit, and they are now having these early release Wednesdays on kind of a handful of Wednesdays throughout the school calendar. And so we had some families reach out to us and say that this was kind of a need, that they needed some after-school care for kiddos on that Wednesday. So we have developed an after-school youth art class that will start up this month, in addition to kind of our regular ongoing youth art classes. This past winter, we started family art classes. And they were very well received, which I was delighted to see. So this picture on the far left is a local family, and those classes sold out. So again, from the feedback, we're gonna keep going with those. And then lastly, partnerships. Partnerships is a big part of what the Red Brick does. So we know working with our local partners, whether they're an art-focused organization or a non-art focused organization, that by working with our partners, we can have that kind of greater impact. So this picture on the far right was a partnership we did with Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. So this particular camp was nature's architects. So they would go in the morning to Hallam Lake, and they would study the beaver dams and the bird's nest and the paper wasp nest, and then they would come back to the Red Brick and they would recreate those in clay and paper making and other mediums. So those camps were hugely successful. The kids had a blast. So to wrap it up, we are going to continue to be responsive, again, to our community needs and, again, work to develop those human connections to serve your goal. And then the wheeler.
Yeah, so Lisa Rigsby-Petersman couldn't be here this evening, so I'm going to read some of her information, and then if we have questions, hopefully some of my colleagues will be able to help answer that. So this is what you typically think of when you think of the Wheeler: concerts and performances by outstanding local, national, and international artists. And on the next slide, you'll see how the Wheeler connects our community in ways you might not have thought about, including outreach to schools and to others in our community. So I know that the Wheeler does school outreach and family programming, and will increase Spanish language programming and also programming that reaches people with disabilities, so the sensory-friendly work. And if you have any other questions related to this item, I'm happy to pass them along, and we can get you some additional information about all of the great work that the Wheeler's doing in this space as well.
Perfect. My name's Austin Weiss. I'm your Parks and Rec Director, and Desiree Whitehead, who is obviously very instrumental in this team, she apologizes. She's unable to join us tonight. She's at a professional development opportunity. But what we want to talk about now is just recreation's role in this goal. And as you, I'm sure, are aware, the Rec Department's mission is to foster vibrant and inclusive community engagement through innovative programs, events, and our multiple facilities. And we'll talk briefly here about some of the ways that we do that, and specifically first with some of the free community events that we do. We oftentimes partner with local organizations, and just this coming weekend, we've got our back to school 3-on-3 basketball tournament that we're partnering with the Elks, the Aspen Elks Club, and the Elks are going to come and do a barbecue for those participants. We do other events throughout the year. Each Halloween over the last several years, we've been doing our trunk and treat event up at the Arc, which provides just a great, safe, and fun community event for especially the younger children in the community. And then to round out our age range here, we do the community health fair each year, and that's typically done in mid-May, where we partner with numerous local health providers in the community. The second aspect that we want to talk about here is trying to provide affordable programs for locals throughout the community. We have a very strong scholarship program. Last year, we gave away over 81 different scholarships for camps and programming and whatnot. And then we also have numerous after-school programs similar to those at the Red Brick. We provide after-school camps up at the Arc and throughout. And we also have summer day camps that provide a resource for local families that need activities for their kids to do, whether it's in the summer or just simply after school. So that's it in a nutshell.
Alrighty, and we're gonna
So before
give
you
up our
guys,
seats too.
before you guys leave, I just had a couple of comments that I wanted to share with this group, and then maybe others have one or two. On the Chill Out Wednesdays, I was wondering, or my suggestion or whatever, take it for what it's worth. Maybe next year it could grow up a little bit. The sing-along campfires and stuff were great, but very age appropriate for younger kids. And I would hope that maybe our Wednesdays could grow into something that's more full family friendly and fun. And you know, maybe put a riser and have a performer on an actual riser and that kind of stuff. Activate the park anyway, just kind of in that direction is kind of what I saw. I did really enjoy it. And I thought it was a great start to it, but I thought it could maybe mature a little bit for next year. Be great. And then Sarah, you were talking about the early release Wednesdays, and I think that's so great that you are doing an actual program to fill that need. And what I would say is through this as a council goal, it would be almost neat to see that evolve to where it's early release Wednesdays and every kid had somewhere to go. Not just if they're interested in art, but if they're interested in
Science, whatever. Sorry
You
to
name
put words in your mouth.
he said science, but yeah, you know, wouldn't it be neat if our, instead of Wednesday early release was just, hey, you don't have to be at school, but maybe there's community connection for early or Wednesday afternoons, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I know that like for myself as a tennis instructor, I would donate my Wednesday afternoons and take up to however many kids wanted. Anyway, but I really appreciate that you stepped into that void and with what you're doing at the Red Brick, and maybe that is something that could catch on even more with the school.
Yeah, thanks for those feedbacks and ideas, yeah.
And then overall, I just want to say this is really neat. You guys do a ton in this area. The city does a ton in this area, but it's changed. You know, years ago, if it didn't make dollars, it didn't make sense. And now that's not our ultimate goal. You know, we're really focused on the connections, bringing people together, weaving the fabric of community together. And so I just really, I thank you guys all that you have that kind of vision about how we're deploying our resources, because I think that's where we are as a community need these days. So thank you. And I don't know, yeah, if Bill, you have some comments in this area.
Thanks to all of you. This is great. I'm excited about it. Very excited about Mactoberfest. I think that's great. It's an event that I've participated in on both sides of the table in the past. Piggybacking a little bit on what Tori said is, I would ask that you, as you're thinking about your new programming, you think about locals first. Okay, and Chill Out Wednesdays, great idea. How many of the attendees are tourists? And is that what the city should be focused on? And is that at the right location if it's locals first? You know, would Pepke Park maybe attract more locals and less tourists? nothing against tourists, but I just think that the events that the city is sponsoring and putting this effort into are about our community. And that's what we should be targeting. So as we're looking for new programming, let's look to the off-season when the private market's providing less opportunities for us all to get together. Let's look to areas of the city where there are less activations. Let's look to what the private market isn't providing that we're hearing is desired. You know, I know only because I said this, I interrupted Tori with this accidentally. I said science. Like, there's this sort of like nascent Aspen Science Center movement, and we all sort of want a kids' science center here, but the private market can't provide it. So is there, is there somehow we can help enhance their programming and provide that for our community's kids? I would just request that you look through the sort of local lens first with all of these efforts, and how do we enhance the opportunities for our community first. Giving away free ice cream to tourists isn't that, to me. No criticism against the event at all. I just want you to look at it through that lens, please.
The event it was a lot of locals at that one that I was at,
Okay.
but nonetheless. Other comments in this area before we move to next?
None really. I'm curious, though. I know the Physics Center used to have a kids-centric weekly program. Is that still running with the Physics Center?
We need to check in with Lisa. Typically, they use the Wheeler space for it, and it would be family-friendly, so not just kids-focused. Also, I was getting ready to look up, I believe they're one of our grantees. Or maybe, Alyssa, if you can check the grantee list for this year while we're here. So the other way we support this really local serving program is that one of the requirements of your community nonprofit grants is that it is serving locals, not the tourism base. And so while we're not doing the direct programming, there's a way we've found through the grant program to funnel that money to organizations that are really better at it, rather than the government trying to figure all of that out. And so we'll touch on that here tonight. I believe we have a slide on that, right?
There is a grant slide. So.
Okay. All right, I'm stealing someone's thunder. I'll stop.
All right.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. The Physics Center used to do this very science-based every week during the summer. It was really cool. I just don't know if it happens anymore because my kid grew up.
We were still going to it last summer.
Okay. Good to know.
We went, I think, twice, but I was over at the Physics Center and the Science Center. We were doing different things over there.
Exactly. No, it was really well done, as I recall.
All right. Good evening, Council. My name is William Porter. I am the Communications Director for the city. City of Aspen's Communications Department is really building upon its collaborative approach, where we will continue to work hand in hand with departments across the city. Ultimately, this new initiative will focus on establishing strong partnerships with a diverse range of organizations spanning the public, nonprofit, and private sectors. Our aim is really to leverage the power of collaboration to magnify our impact, enhance service delivery, and make optimal use of available resources while upholding fiscal responsibility. And this will really be done through a three-pronged approach. It starts with a thorough assessment. It's conducting meticulously and systematically to assess and identify potential partners across all three sectors. And again, we'll meticulously evaluate entities that share our values, mission, and areas of expertise. This alignment is crucial to ensure that the partnerships we form are not only fruitful, but also enhance our ability to serve the community effectively. And building upon the assessment, the department will act as a vital link connecting diverse organizations, facilitating communication, and ensuring thoughtful integration of partnerships into the current business partner model. This framework will also serve as a roadmap for future collaborations, ensuring that they also seamlessly integrate into city operations. The model's design will streamline this entire process from identifying partners to evaluating them and engaging in joint efforts. And then lastly, it's really about uniting synergies and the pursuit of potential partners while establishing this model. We hope that these synergies could be found in shared objectives, overlapping areas of expertise, or collaborative projects that uphold mutual benefits. And the communications department will work diligently to facilitate these connections, bringing different entities together in a cohesive and productive manner. And we hope by embarking on building this framework, we hope to not only strengthen the City of Aspen's capabilities, but also foster a network of collaborative endeavors that will drive positive change across the organization.
I'm going to just take a minute and give you, let's have a couple examples, because that was a lot of process pieces in there. So examples might be is taking another look at how we partner with another entity where perhaps they're amplifying in a place that we can support a particular council goal through them. Maybe it's the River District, as an example, where we want to be more targeted in those support efforts rather than generating our own campaign. How do we support someone else's campaign in a collaborative function to be more effective with those dollars and with the outreach? So I just want to kind of get some practicality around how we would approach that.
Yeah. Minimizing duplication of efforts and really bringing people together, because there's, sustainability, climate action, there are many people in this space, but I think we're trying to minimize silos and ultimately bring people together so we can maximize impact, but also leverage, fiscal responsibility as well.
There it is.
There you go.
It's not gone.
All right. So one of the milestones is the Armory redevelopment. All of you have been involved in this to a degree. Currently, we have done outreach in 2022 that provided public opportunities to provide the top uses they'd like to see this building remodeled and used for. We've also had work sessions on the construction timeline for this project. So currently, we'll be looking at engaging a number of different consultants to vet out concept planning and come back to council in November for looking at what makes the most sense based on engagement results, going back to the community, and looking at some market feasibility and what actually can fit into the building. And it'll be time for council to make some decisions in November on how to move forward with this project. We'll be going into design development after that November meeting. We'll need to decide on funding options for this project, and the goal is to start construction in 2026.
So one of the key things here is that you will see, we send you an info-only memo last week with a lot more detail on the project timeline. The other piece I want to just point out is that we will be coming to you for funding for the fit test analysis because those funds were not appropriated in 2023 and a few other things. So just a heads up that you'll be seeing those requests come through here later this year for allocation. But it's necessary work for you to finalize use. And once you finalize use, that really gives us a better go button. We're a little stuck until we get use finalized.
And out of this process, will they be giving us options? I mean, it's the photo that you have right there. It made me. I was looking at it on my screen, and I'm like, wow, you could leave the third floor and have third floor uses, and then do a 2-level, blah blah blah. And I'm like, wow, there's so many. I have no idea. So are they gonna?
They're going to look at different footprints and
Right.
Square footages and what can fit in those, and different options of mixes of uses in that building.
With or without the alley addition?
That will probably be one of the options. I mean, and that there's going to be costs associated with the different decisions. So I think it's going to be, balancing budget and what you want the building to fit, what it can fit in different scenarios.
Right.
Or how do we prepare it as a consideration for a future council as well? can't future-proof the building, but we can make some key decisions that will make it possible for future council to consider that.
Thank you. Awesome. Great.
Good evening, Council. Alyssa Farrell, Administrative Services Director. I think I'm up. So one area in terms of the infrastructure for a thriving community would be really making sure our nonprofits are strategic and have a long-term sustainability lens. Side note, before I forget, yes, we have funded the Aspen Science Center. Okay. So back to the Health and Human Services Grant Program. For this year, we're piloting an innovative program that really focuses on, we're working with John Daugherty, with HSI, Human Service Innovation, and the long-term sustainability of our grants. You don't typically see nonprofits offering, there aren't grants typically offered for operational expenses with nonprofits, and this is helping an area where most nonprofits, yes, outwardly, they're providing services, right, in our community, but inwardly, with the strategic planning, looking at can they weather the storms when the economy when the economy falls, perhaps, or a financial sustainability model. We're really working with executive directors, bringing them to the table, and connecting them with John Daugherty and working through strategic planning and making our nonprofits for our community, integrating and weaving in a long-term sustainable model.
I meet with John next week for a check-in on how this and a few other things are going, and I will tell you the initial feedback has been overwhelmingly positive from the executive directors, because they've not really had an opportunity. They have this passion, but not necessarily have had the opportunity for the mentoring on some of this strategy planning. Maybe their boards don't necessarily yet have people who bring that to the table to support them. So we'll definitely prepare you in info only when that program finalizes to help you in deciding whether to fund this again in 2024.
And thank you. To add on to that, we're looking at outcomes, deliverables within the info-only memo, and it would be towards the end of the year that we will provide that information for you. Currently, it's Great Expectations. It's a nonprofit, and they focus on supporting new mothers in the Valley, Windwalkers for equine therapy, and Aspen Legal Services. So it's about this strategic planning and long-term health of our community, along with really partnerships that are being developed within these nonprofits. And it's a big ask for the nonprofits. It's important, and they're excited for it with their boards and their senior leadership, and they are finding it very fruitful. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Kim Ferber, your Chief of Police. To support this goal, the Police Department is participating in a milestone in what I refer to as HSO 2.0. As many of you know, you have supported the Police Department in standing up the Pitkin Area Co-Responder Team Model in this community about 5 years ago. I'd really say that the City of Aspen and the Aspen Police Department are pioneers in this area and have been immensely successful in what they're doing. But 5 years in, I think it's time for us to look at the 2.0. And so we are looking at previous year's outcomes. We are looking at nationally recognized best practices, and we are standing up a steering committee with both our internal and external partners to look at recommendations that we may want to come to you with, at least key recommendations for your consideration. I anticipate it'll probably be before quarter 2 2024, but because this is our first real comprehensive steering committee that we've used in some time in the organization, I wanted to give us a little bit of freedom here. Initially, we'll utilize all of our in-house resources to take care of this, including we're going to use a newly trained facilitator that is a City of Aspen staff member, so we're pretty excited about that. And then our future requests of all of you will be determined in the near future.
Yeah, John, question there?
No question. I just want to say I got on council shortly after the George Floyd incident and was made aware of the fact that so many tragic circumstances could have been avoided if mental health assistance was available on scene. And to find out that it was already being employed here by our police department really made me feel good about the direction our city's going in that area. So thanks.
I appreciate that, and I think the two HSO officers that we have right now, they're very, very committed to this program, and I think the team coming together to do this steering committee will provide even additional support for this program in our organization. They're really doing some really phenomenal work in the field. Excellent. Thank you.
So adding capacity to the community for childcare services, one of the milestones is receiving the entitlements for the Burlingame Child Care Center. That was the formal direction of council to get the project entitled so that if and when you're ready to submit for a building permit or develop the project, it could move forward. The land use application is being developed. We did some recent outreach, and we should have that submitted end of August, beginning of September at this point.
And last but not least, the third leg of the stool related to the land use code and community developments portion of this particular goal, developing policies and or regulations that incentivize and promote desirable uses in our community's commercial spaces. And staff really conceives of this goal as being focused on zoning, character, urban design, and the relationship between the built environment and our community in our commercial zones. It was mentioned in the previous discussion, the term economic development. And that term has been actively avoided in this community for several decades. And there's some intentionality behind that. Again, going back to the 1983 Aspen Area Community Plan, the terms used then were locally owned and locally served businesses and economic sustainability and vitality. And in a sense, you know, that intentionality to use the right language to describe what we're doing is really important. And from a professional standpoint, it does leave some tools off the table in terms of how communities can think about, again, the relationship between how their built environment is used and how that fosters community and economic vitality, or whatever terms you want to use. And so staff has sort of conceived of this goal as being in two parts. Again, some issue statement or problem identification work needs to happen in work session with council to understand the state of play, both as council sees it in our commercial zones, as well as some staff assessment from a sort of best practices and sort of planning 101 standpoint. What's going on in our commercial zones? How does it relate to adopted city policy around these topics? And then finally, what are some of the tools that might be available to address that? And the land use code traditionally, in lieu of doing traditional economic development, the land use code in Aspen has been used as a economic development tool, whether it's incentives around the size of lodge rooms or incentives around breaks for affordable housing mitigation for preserving second-tier commercial space, or whatever the topic's going to be. We have used the land use code for decades as an economic vitality tool, if you will. And so breaking some of that apart and understanding how we got here, and then hearing from council where it is that you'd like to go in terms of desired future condition, I think is really the first step in that work. And I hate to sort of not be able to provide more concrete direction around this, but until we know where it is council wants to go and the scope of some of that work, we really can't know what next steps might look like. But it's likely that they would involve amendments to the land use code, be it around things like how we allow or don't allow retail and restaurant uses to use private and public spaces, or the way that those spaces are treated from a design standpoint. These are all things that touch the land use code in one way or another, and may or may not be in play in terms of ultimately responding to where council would like to go on that. But again, that is a conversation that we look forward to having next year, because we frankly have a lot of things on our plate. And this, of the 3 topics discussed this evening, and frankly, of those items that community development is asked to engage in on the longer list of council goals, this has the potential to be the heaviest lift and the most impactful. So I think with that, we're ready to take any additional questions from council on that or any of the other goals.
Thanks so much. I'll start. Sarah, so much work has been put into this from different departments, different individuals. All of this came out of the conversation we had at our retreat. And I asked that with that question mark because, like,
You can certainly narrow the goal if the council wishes to. This is inclusive of where we heard you wanted to go. And yeah, we looked at, that's why we said, this is a lot of work, these 6 goals. This is a lot. And we have to figure out how we're going to balance that compared to core tasks and responsibilities of the organization. But we'll let you know when we need help to make that happen for sure.
so then my question to you would be, it seems that you built this out, this goal, you built this out in many different sectors because it's community building and health. So I understand that. Bless you. Is it, last time we did a council goal, I asked the question, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that we, but this time I think I would ask it the other way. Are there things that we included that, anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just, boy, this is a lot. And I just, I'm glad everybody's excited, but this is a lot. And so I'm just kind of saying, hey, this is digestible?
Yeah, some of this is a stretch, and that's okay to stretch, right? That's how the organization and the community grows and responds. I think what's going to be key is particularly these areas that relate back to the commercial sector of the community. We have to remember back in 1983, the community tried to figure it out, and the community's still trying.
Right.
So we need to just manage our expectations on what success looks like in only 2 years on something that's 40 years old. As a challenge for the community. And so it's about making progress. Often I say it's about progress, not perfection, on the issue. But I do think we need to spend some time exploring how do we maintain, I'm not going to say even locally serving, I'm going to say essential services in the community that are provided by the private sector. And those are things like pharmacies and grocery stores even.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be a bit broader and not think just about where do people go to eat.
Yeah.
When we have those conversations. So when we're trying to set things up for 50 years from now, what can we do today in our generation to support 2 generations away from now with this issue? Because the generation before us didn't solve it back in '83.
We better hang on to that one gas station we have.
Thank you. That's really helpful input. I really appreciate you framing it in that way. Okay, other council members? I'll start with Ward. Ward, do you have any comments?
Well, I think it's great to look at what the arts and the Wheeler and all those other community connections are. Packed, big fan of that. I think where I put most of my notes and questions and efforts were on the community development side of how could we make spaces available that are affordable. And completion of projects. I had a question, is it possible to have policies that would affect already approved projects? People that have building permits and have already started, are there any kind of policies that can apply to already existing development in holding projects to completion schedules? And I think that's perhaps where some of the fund requests are to what other communities are doing, if they're successful, if there's something that can be done for all of those that are already started or in the pipeline, because that's, I think, what a lot of the comments from the community I've heard are, on the bus yesterday. You know, I haven't seen any action going on at all at the Crystal Palace site. What's going on? What's going on at Restoration Hardware, the old Sabatini's corner, Fritz Benedict? What's going on there? In, you know, if we have to hire consultants to look at what other communities have done that can address these issues, I'm all for that. But again, it brings up some of the things that I mentioned with you, Bill, is that since '83, we've been trying to get the government, what is the place of government to have, quote, sustainable economy, a diverse economy. And without some kind of governmental interference, we probably would still have the Cuyahoga River burning and no Clean Air Act, and there'd be vaping in the city, and there would be no tobacco tax. Sometimes you have to make a decision of where is government interference and interjection to the best of the community, and this area might be some of those areas where we supply incentives or disincentives for certain things that are delivered that we don't want, or to incentivize that we do want. And to Tori's question, I wonder, you know, it's a stretch. How much have we put on the plate already that is preventing us from proceeding more quickly on some of these goals? So to manage our expectations and not to continually put more work on the plate of our staff, to be more nimble and to be able to answer some of our goals more quickly. And in reading through all of this, you know, these are things that have been started years ago and will extend past our terms on council. There is a scenario that in 2 years from now, this council could be made up with the same 5 people. But chances are that they're going to be a different group of people, and we're looking, hopefully, at creating a goal that will extend beyond our own council, that we have a vision and a process and some procedures and policies that are in the works or have been completed, that future councils will see the wisdom in and want to continue along those lines. I know that one of the biggest, here we are several months into this council. We had our retreat, when was it, May? We had a retreat in May, and here it is August, and we're just beginning to get to see when we're looking at beginning Q2 2024, and it takes a long time to get stuff done, and I think it extends that time period when we put too much on the plate of our staff. So to be realistic about what can be done and what we're asking of staff to do, and to perhaps to Tori's point of refining what we want to focus our attention on. So it's just, I think in this area, in the community development area, I think is what Bill brought up about what can we do in the land use code to encourage what we want, and what can we do to discourage what we don't want. That's what I look in this, to me, that's the most important. But overall, it's going to go beyond what our terms on council are.
Thank you, Ward. Sam, comments in this area?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone. You know, we talk about the extension of it all, but it's so many different departments that are here. So I think you all have some wonderful tasks to run with. And my mentality is similar to Bill and Ward's, and what they said was the comm dev aspect and what we can do in our land use code to incentivize and disincentivize to get what we are looking to get out of it. It's the empty spaces installed projects in town that really are a blemish on this community sometimes. So getting that fixed up, especially in the next couple of years, will be definitely a success in the short term and the long term, hopefully.
Thanks, Sam. Bill, final thoughts here?
Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for your work on this. I'll be honest, when I was reviewing the packet, I was quite concerned about, mission creep, scope creep on this goal. But I'm actually liking the sort of messaging that it sends throughout the organization, that we should all be focused on how do we create a cohesive community and continue to create a cohesive community. So, obviously there is more effort in certain areas than in others, but I've warmed to it. Back to the community development pieces of this. And Sam, of course, I agree with you that the blight from stalled construction projects and empty spaces is undesirable. But I would say that enhancing, and I'm not trying to place sole blame on community development here, Philip. I know that this is multi-pronged and there's lots of responsibility, so please don't take this that way. But I think enhancing our development processes and the permit processing will help part of that issue. And maybe I know a little too much here, and it's making me too skeptical, but I just don't know that there's that many tools to address commercial vacancies and address construction projects that aren't being completed timely. So I just don't want to have Philip and his team spin their wheels on that one. I do think that there's some really creative, interesting things we can do on this one that will help in the long term. But it just doesn't seem worth it to me to hire consultants to talk about how do we make sure a construction project gets done. My skepticism tells me the only thing anyone will ever come up with is a performance bond, and it's just not a feasible solution. I don't think. So I would, my only sort of change I would request on this is let's get rid of the stuff on the work on stalled construction projects and commercial vacancies, only because I don't think they'll generate fruit and put more effort into this one.
Mayor Tory, if I can offer a sort of idea around some of the consensus I'm hearing at the tail, or not consensus, but some of the comments I'm hearing around that particular goal element.
Yeah.
Prior to engaging a consultant, I think prior to starting to explore potential solutions on the commercial construction dynamics topic, staff can I think support a really meaningful conversation with council on a couple of topics. One is, what are the dynamics at play in our community now? What are the properties that we're talking about, maybe generally? And I think, importantly, what does our development pipeline look like? What are the projects in our commercial and lodge zone districts that could conceivably be coming in the next 5 to 10 years that would be subject to a new regulatory regime with respect to getting done on time and smoothly, right? Because it may very well be that with that information, council feels as though there isn't enough of a concern with upcoming projects to want to dedicate resources to putting new solutions in place, right? And there are a couple of tools other than performance bonds. There's one tool in particular. It's an impact fee related to lost sales tax revenue. So if you have a property that has commercial uses that are not generating sales tax because they're vacant or because the property has been demolished and not redeveloped, an impact fee could be assessed. I've seen this in other communities, could be assessed on that lost revenue. That's honestly, other than a performance bond, the only other tool that I'm aware of right now. So we can, I think, have a meaningful conversation to get council to a place where you can direct us to do additional work on this or not without spinning our wheels a lot. If that's something you'd like us to do, then that can be our approach to this particular goal element.
Yeah, I'm totally open to that conversation and would like to have that conversation. I just don't know that the consultant work is that exciting to me.
I support that. I appreciate you coming forward with that. That's okay with the city manager. Makes sense?
It's your goal, however you want to amend it.
Well, I guess what I was really talking about was Philip's suggestion that this would be a work session item for perhaps later this year, so.
Well, and I think you would benefit and the entire community would benefit in understanding the pipeline. We talk about the pipeline in our business, but I'm not sure the community understands the extent of approvals that exist right now in this community. it is pretty big, both in valuation and in numbers of projects.
And Philip, I'd say for that work session, I think it'd be super helpful for everyone if you could share some insight on what can and cannot be done at a high level for projects in the development pipeline already. So whether that means they've applied for some kind of land use approval or a building permit or have a building permit in hand, like what kind of tools may or may not be available to you once those processes have been started.
Yeah. Mr. True can help us understand the relationship between vesting and, that I think is something that staff can do without too heavy of a lift and get council to a place where you can direct us to continue on that particular goal element or not.
Thanks, Bill. John, I'm going to look at you for any last comments or words on this topic.
I'm just excited about the opportunities that might present themselves as we move forward with this work. And I know we have the staff that can do this.
Thanks, John. With that, I think that concludes our agenda items, and I just want to say, great work this evening. Thank you to all of you that are in the room now, those that were here before, and such a good work session tonight. I think that we should not have a work session tomorrow. Council, you can
I'm with you.
take tomorrow night off then? Okay.
This was so good.
This was very productive. So let's all get together for a picnic on Thursday. How about that? Right here. Right outside.
Instead of the red brick like I was.
Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you. Thank you to GrassRoots. Like I was saying, no work session tomorrow, but if you're watching this, come out Thursday, 4:30 p.m. right here in Galena Plaza. We're going to be having our community picnic. Thank you, guys.